The sun had dipped behind the mountains, casting the valley into shadows as the trio of friends made their way through the desolate landscape. Hollow Creek, the ghost town they had heard so much about, lay just ahead, a place shrouded in rumors and whispered about in hushed tones for generations. Once a thriving mining town, Hollow Creek had been abandoned after a mysterious tragedy claimed the lives of its children. Since then, no one dared set foot in the crumbling streets, and the town became a place of legend. Jared, the ringleader of the group, had always been fascinated by ghost towns and the strange energy they seemed to hold. His friends, Mark and Samantha, were less enthusiastic, but had agreed to join him for one last adventure before they all went their separate ways after graduation. Armed with flashlights, a few snacks, and an old map Jared had found online, they were ready to explore the eerie remains of Hollow Creek. "We should be careful," Samantha muttered, her voice uncertain as they crossed into the town limits. "You've heard the stories, right? About the kids?" Jared scoffed, shining his flashlight over a rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek." "Yeah, I've heard the stories. It's just an old mining accident or something. Besides, no one's been here for decades, except for us. Don't tell me you believe in ghost children." Mark, ever the pragmatic one, shook his head. "We'll check it out. But if things get weird, we leave. Agreed?" Samantha nodded quickly, and even Jared mumbled an agreement. None of them could shake the feeling that something was wrong. As they ventured deeper into the ghost town, the streets became narrower, lined with dilapidated buildings that leaned precariously, their windows broken like shattered teeth. The air seemed colder here, thick with a silence that pressed against them. A wooden swing set creaked in the distance, its chains swaying as though caught in a phantom breeze. Samantha shivered, her eyes flicking toward the noise. "Did you hear that?" Jared grinned, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "It's just the wind. Come on, there's got to be something cool in the old schoolhouse. It's over there." They approached the crumbling structure, its roof caved in, and weeds growing thick along its foundation. The door hung loosely on its hinges, creaking as Jared pushed it open. The air inside was stale, and the faint smell of decay lingered. Dust particles danced in the beam of their flashlights as they cautiously stepped inside. The desks were still in place, though most were broken or overturned. Faded chalk drawings on the blackboard hinted at lessons that had been abruptly abandoned. Samantha's heart raced as she noticed tiny handprints, seemingly fresh, streaked across the blackboard. "Jared, I don't think we should be here," she whispered, backing away from the eerie sight. Before Jared could respond, Mark froze, his flashlight aimed toward the far corner of the room. There, huddled beneath a broken desk, was the figure of a child. The boy's skin was pale, his eyes wide and sunken, his clothes tattered and dirty. His head slowly turned toward them, and when he opened his mouth, the sound that came out was a low, guttural moan. "Jesus, what the—" Jared stumbled back, his bravado gone in an instant. Samantha screamed, the sound echoing through the empty town. Mark tried to pull her toward the door, but as they turned to flee, the boy vanished. The room fell silent once more, but the atmosphere had shifted. Something darker now lurked in the shadows. "We have to get out of here," Mark hissed, pushing Jared toward the exit. But just as they reached the threshold, a chorus of high-pitched giggles filled the air, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "They're playing with us," Samantha whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. They burst out of the schoolhouse gasping for air and looked around the abandoned town. What had once appeared lifeless now seemed alive with movement. Shadows darted between buildings, and the eerie laughter of children echoed through the narrow streets. The trio hurried toward what they thought was the edge of town, but the streets seemed to twist and change, leading them deeper into the heart of Hollow Creek. "We're going in circles," Mark shouted, panic rising in his throat. Jared stopped, breathing heavily. "Number, there's gotta be a way out. We just need to figure out where we are." A low, haunting voice echoed through the air. "Stay and play with us." The three friends spun around, but no one was there. The voice seemed to come from the very ground beneath their feet. They could hear footsteps now, the unmistakable pitter-patter of children's feet on cobblestone, yet they saw no one. Samantha's breathing became ragged as she clutched Mark's arm. "I can feel them. They're watching us." Samantha's breathing became ragged as she clutched Mark's arm. "I can feel them. They're watching us." Suddenly, Jared's flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into near-total darkness. The others followed, their beams dimming until they were left in a barely perceptible glow. In the distance, a soft light appeared. It looked like a lantern being carried through the streets by a figure that was all too small. The three hesitated, unsure whether to approach or flee. But the light came closer, revealing the same pale child from the schoolhouse. The boy stopped a few feet in front of them, holding the lantern up to his face. His hollow eyes seemed to stare right through them as he whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." Jared swallowed hard. "We didn't mean any harm. We're leaving." The boy tilted his head, the ghost of a smile on his cracked lips. "No one leaves Hollow Creek." The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, and the sound of children's voices surrounded them once more. But this time, they weren't laughing. They were crying, screaming in anguish, as if reliving some horrible moment from the past. Samantha's legs gave out, and she fell to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Mark and Jared tried to pull her up, but it felt as though an invisible force was holding her down. "We have to go," Mark yelled, his voice cracking with fear. But it was too late. The ground beneath Samantha opened up, and with a sickening crack, she was pulled under, vanishing into the earth as though swallowed whole by the town itself. Her screams echoed for a moment, before being abruptly cut off. Jared and Mark stared in horror, their minds barely able to process what had just happened. The boy with the lantern stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "They all die here," the boy said softly, "just like us." Mark grabbed Jared's arm, pulling him away from the boy and the gaping hole where Samantha had disappeared. "We have to run. Now." They sprinted through the twisting streets, their lungs burning, but no matter how far they ran, they couldn't escape the town. The laughter and the crying followed them, growing louder and more frantic with each step. The children's voices seemed to merge into a cacophony of suffering and madness. Finally, they reached the edge of town. The sign that had once welcomed them now appeared as a mocking farewell. Mark gasped for breath, turning to Jared, who was staring at something just beyond the sign. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with terror. Mark followed his gaze and saw them, dozens of children, their ghostly forms standing just beyond the town's border. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow, and they stared silently at the two friends, as if waiting for something. Suddenly, Jared screamed. His body jerked violently, as though invisible hands were pulling at him. Mark watched in horror as his friend's skin seemed to stretch and tear, his screams becoming high-pitched and unnatural. Within moments, Jared was gone, reduced to nothing but a wisp of smoke, leaving Mark alone. The ghostly children stared at him, unmoving. Mark turned and ran, not daring to look back until he reached his car parked miles away from the town. He collapsed inside, his entire body shaking. As he fumbled for the keys, A soft voice whispered from the back seat, "Stay and play with us." The last thing Mark saw before the darkness claimed him was the reflection of a pale, ghostly child staring at him from the rearview mirror. Hollow Creek had claimed another,